Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and community. Community is one of my favorite shows, and it is downright hysterical. So I want to talk about that today, and I want to talk about how math is used in it. And so yeah, we're gonna get into it, and I hope you all have fun. If you've never seen Community, I hope you do. If you have, I hope you enjoy this video. Hope you think about it in a different way, and feel free to talk about your experiences with Community. And for the record, if you did see Community and you've only seen the first 3 seasons, fair enough. Honestly, you've seen most of Community, but I would say that seasons 5 and 6 are underrated and they're worth watching. For season 4, I mean, it's worth watching just to see what everyone was talking about. But we'll get into all of that later because there's math involved in all of that too. So yeah, let's get into it. Like I said, Community is one of my favorite shows. I've rewatched it a lot. I'm rewatching it now, actually. So what I want to do before going to do too deep into that is I want to talk about math and comedy, and then how Community works with all of that. And I think that'll be fun. So with comedy, there's a lot of things that you could talk about within it, and I want to talk about jokes to start out with, right? I want to talk about the basic formula of a joke, and then kind of go from there. So with a joke, right, the basic formula is you have your setup plus your punchline, and that equals your joke. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that, right? There's a lot of ways that could be implemented. There could be jokes within jokes. There could be jokes that look like they were going one way, but went another. But there's math in how all of that is formulated. And not only is there math in the formulation of a joke, but there's math in its execution, right? There's math in its timing. And when you're telling jokes, it varies medium to medium. My phone glitched out for a second, but I noticed it. So I was able too far. It looks like it just did again. But anyway, things vary medium to medium, right? Because like if I'm telling a joke in written form, like let's say on a book, or with a book, right? How I tell a joke in a book is going to be different. Or if I tell a joke in audio form, there are layers to that too, because it could just be like if I'm telling a joke on the radio, or if I'm talking about a joke in stand-up or on a show where the visual component isn't every single thing, right? So there's that audio side of things and how that works. But there's also the visual side of humor, right? If I'm telling jokes in a visual way, there's so many different ways I could do that, right? Because there's certain visual gags you could use, certain expectations that you can play with, but there's also the audio component that you're working with too, and it could all come together. So when you see a joke on TV or even in stand-up or on a movie or in a movie, right, there's math and how all that works, and the jokes can be told in different ways. But even within the same medium, things can vary. Because like, let's say you're doing a TV show, right? And so you have that visual and audio component of telling a joke to worry about. It's still going to vary show to show, because you might get a joke in a drama, but if comedy is the focus, how jokes work can be very, very different, right? And I feel like that's a given, but it's worth saying. But even in the realm of comedy, there's so many different ways to implement a joke. And how I tell a joke in a sitcom like Community is different than how I talk about a joke in Key and Peele, which is a sketch comedy show, and that's also different than how I would tell a joke in an animated format like Rick and Morty. And then with Rick and Morty, right, there's a lot of similarities to that in Community despite the setting, right? They have a lot of the same humor styles in some cases, or the way they use certain plot elements. And despite that being the case, there's still a difference in how they tell a joke, how they implement things. And I think that's fascinating. But back to Community, it is such a cool show. Now, if you're watching it these days, problematic elements, definitely some problematic elements, but with comedy, I feel like you're gonna get that, and it's all in to take with that. And keep on seeing my video glitch. but I'm getting far into this one, so I don't want to stop. I'll just be mindful of that and continue. Um, but yeah, so how Community works is just like it's such a cool show for me because not only are you not only do you have to worry about telling a joke, but in a sitcom, right, you're worrying about telling the joke within the framework of a story. And not only is there math within telling the jokes, but there's math with how that fits into the larger picture. And with Community, it's a fascinating show because there's math all over it. Like, so if you're watching season one, it actually doesn't take that long to have the characters be established with some of their key traits. Now, there's a lot of math in the jokes that are being used to depict these characters, but also like math and how much time gets devoted to the explanations to go along with those jokes, and how fast this is all going so you can keep the show running. And then you're balancing the comedy with the more dramatic elements, which they're not there too heavily in Community, but they are there. And with Dan Harmon, he has this whole story circle idea, and there's math in that and how that works and how that works within each episode and how he might modify things each episode, right? Because it's not a strict thing per se. You can play games with it, but he uses it as a guide, and he's gone on record saying that, right? And so there's a lot of math in how the show gets set up because you have your start, and a lot of jokes are told throughout the show. You have your A plot, you have your B plot, and you have a lot of things moving around, and there's math in all of that. And with Community, one of the most fascinating things to me is so you have the way basic jokes are told and how there's a lot of math in that, but some jokes take a while to discover or work really well when you're binging. So I won't say the exact thing, but if you're watching the first season of Community, there's something that's mentioned in the first season, and then once that thing is mentioned, not only do you have that happen in the second season and the third season, but it works with how the joke is set up. The joke's indicating one thing, and like it happens, and I think that's pretty cool. Not sure if I said that exactly how I wanted to, but I guess like in short, like Community not only excels at making jokes within an episode, but it's great at telling reoccurring gags, and is well at telling a joke that takes several seasons to complete. And I think that's all amazing. And when it comes to joking or making jokes, right, timing is everything, and they have so much to consider with it, right? Because like in each season, right, you only have a certain amount of episodes, and within each episode, you have about 20 minutes to tell the story you want to tell in that episode. So you want to be careful with what you want to do, right? So you have to break down that episode however you need to break down that episode. And there's a lot of math in that and how the comedy works in that. And I think that's all really cool. But it's not just that, right? There's a lot of math involved with making the show. Because right, not only do you have a certain amount of time that each episode is going to be, but each episode is going to have its own budget. Each episode is going to have a lot of hours poured into it, right? Because you have the writers and they're working and they're doing a lot of math when they're storytelling, but you also have the actors and how they say their lines, what they're working with, how they relate to each other. There's math in all of that, right? There's math in the lighting, math in the sound, math in the logistics that's pulling everything together. And I think that's all really cool. And then everyone is putting in so much time. And I've seen some of the behind the scenes with Community. They put in some seriously long days to bring that comedy to life, to bring that comedy that a lot of us have enjoyed out there. And so that's fascinating to me too, because when you're creating stuff, you often put a lot of time into whatever you're creating, and what you're creating may vary in length, but it doesn't necessarily compare to what the amount of time you put in, if that makes any sense, right? So it's fascinating because you spend all this time doing this thing, and then it gets refined and a product is created. And there's a lot of math in how that all works too, because you might be doing something for 12 hours or something, and maybe you get this 20-minute episode and it's wild, but I think it's interesting because not only are we all getting a laugh out of that, but or laugh out of the show, but people are getting paid to do this, right? And so if you are working on a show, it's interesting because you're like, okay, I'm going to put in this amount of hours for maybe like a show or a movie that is going to be this length. Is that going to be worth it to me? Am I going to be getting paid enough? Am I going to be exposing? And there's math and how all that works, and so you gotta think about that. And if you're the person watching, then you gotta think about the time that you're investing in something. And it's like with a sitcom, I feel like it's low stakes in a sense because right, it's about 20 minutes. So if you don't like an episode, it's not that bad. But with Community, I find like even their weaker episodes are typically strong, at least compared to a lot of other shows. And I feel like it flew under the radar for a while, but I did get to watch most of that live. So that was cool. In any case, yeah. So there's a lot of time involved in making a show, and a lot of time involved in watching shows, right? So I think all that's interesting in math is in all of it. And now to talk about some of the things that I wanted to talk about in the beginning with Community. Now I got a lot of that done. So Community is 6 seasons. For those first 3 seasons, it actually has the bulk of the show with about 75 or so episodes. Um, and then with the remaining episodes, uh, it's 30 something, maybe closer to 40. I should have looked this up before. So actually, I think it's more like 70 episodes or so for the first 3 seasons, and maybe 40 episodes or so for the last 3. So it's kind of crazy how Community got divided up. So if you did see the 3 seasons, like I think most people who have seen Community have, then yes, you have seen most of the show. But if you haven't seen that remaining 40 or so, then you are missing out on some of them. Like because like so the 4th season was mediocre. It wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was bad by community standards. And it's interesting because they, in many ways, had a lot of the same formulas, right? They used a lot of the same gimmicks, but the execution didn't quite work. There was something off about the math in that comedy, and it showed. But again, it's like it's not unwatchable. It's just like not the best, despite it having a lot of things that Community had. And that was the year that the showrunner Dan Harmon had gotten fired. Now they brought him back for the 5th episode, and then they kind of did things differently from there. And the 5th season was pretty strong, except for the finale, which was just kind of very surreal, but not necessarily in a good way. And then season 6 was really great. Season 6, episode 3, that was one of the most hilarious episodes of just any show, and it was my favorite Community episode, which is saying something because I really liked the video game episode. I really liked the episode when they're talking about different timelines. So yeah, Community is an interesting show. It's one of my favorites, and it's just there's so much math in it. There's so much math in how it all came together. And I do think that if you have seen Community and you haven't seen the rest of it, you should. For 4, I mean, just to see what all the fuss is about, but it's not going to probably thrill you. For seasons 5 and 6, they were actually pretty good, and I do think that Community is an interesting show because each season is definitely Community, but each season does feel somewhat different. I will say seasons 1 and 2 are probably the most consistent in tone. Season 3 started to get increasingly meta. Like there was always meta elements to the show, but season 3 took it to another level. They also had a lot of homages and parodies, and I think that's pretty cool. Then season 4, that year was off. That was what they called the gas leak year in the show, which is really petty but really funny. Seasons 5 and 6, they were a bit more grounded. They were grounded kind of like how seasons 1 and 2 are in their own right, but they still had a lot of meta stuff in them. It was a very, very different feel, but not bad. All right, so I was trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to say, and I think that's about it. Community is one of my favorite shows. I think it's worth a watch if you haven't watched it at all, and if you haven't seen all of it, I do think it's worth watching because even with its weaker episodes and its weakest season, it was still better than a lot of other shows out there, and even with some problematic stuff in some of the episodes, it still holds up. And I've watched it a lot, and I again like my video froze again for a second, but I caught it. I'm currently watching it now, and this is probably the 40 billionth time I have, and I don't regret that. So I'll see you in the next video. I hope you've enjoyed. Professor Prime out.